never thought that a simple weekend at the lake could upend everything I thought I knew about my life. The summer heat was becoming unbearable, and my husband Andrea had decided to bring the whole family to our lake house. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, creating an atmosphere of calm that contrasted with the whirlwind of emotions that would soon arrive. Our son Alessandro, 26 years old, had invited some friends to join him for the weekend. I never expected that one of those friends would turn my life upside down in such a shocking way. If you want to find out what will happen this weekend at the lake and how everything will change, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of the story. When Ricardo arrived, a 42-year-old man with a charming smile and eyes that seemed to peer into the soul, I immediately felt out of place among those noisy young people. He had a magnetic presence, a calm but irresistible energy that seemed to draw me like a magnet. I, with my well-groomed 52 years, felt at peace with my age, but that evening, in her gaze, I seemed to rediscover a young 32-year-old, a version of myself that I thought I had forgotten. During dinner, Ricardo gave me some looks that could not be misunderstood. Those dark eyes were like embers that seemed to awaken something dormant inside me, a warmth that passed through my skin until it reached my heart. I felt his gaze lingering on me while my husband laughed and chatted, unaware of the electrical tension that was building. Even though I didn't say anything, I felt a dangerous sense of excitement growing inside me. It wasn't the first time a man had shown interest in me, but there was something different about Ricardo, something forbidden and irresistible, a mix of confidence and vulnerability that seemed to shine through in his every gesture. Once dinner was over, Alessandro and the other boys moved to the garden to drink and joke. I stayed in the house to tidy up the kitchen, and just at that moment Ricardo came in, offering to help me. His hands, large and strong, moved with a deliberate slowness, as if he wanted to prolong that moment between us. His closeness was disarming. I could feel the heat of his body touching me as he moved the dishes with a calm that almost seemed studied. "You're beautiful, you know that?" he whispered to me suddenly. His voice was deep, filled with more than just a compliment. I froze, feeling my heart speed up, my hand shaking slightly as I held a glass. The words were simple, but the way he said them made me feel like I was the only woman in the world, like everything else was just a faded outline in that moment. The following days were torment. Ricardo seemed everywhere, a chance encounter in the hallway, a mischievous smile when no one was looking, a light brush of the hand as we passed each other. Every little contact made me shiver, like an electric shock running through my skin. I was confused and torn. On the one hand, there was Andrea, my husband of 30 years, the person I had always been able to count on, a love made of habits, certainties, and shared moments. On the other hand, there was this new, overwhelming emotion, a fire that I couldn't tame, a primordial call that seemed to want to destroy everything I knew, to build something new, uncertain, but infinitely fascinating. One afternoon, while everyone was out bathing in the lake, Ricardo joined me on the terrace. The house was silent. The only noise was the distant sound of the children's laughter and the rustling of the leaves moving in the light wind. We were alone. I could smell his skin, mixed with that of the lake and the sun. Desire burned inside me, a heat that rose from my insides until it made my breathing labored. "We can't. It's wrong," I whispered, but my voice was weak, almost pleading. My hands clung to the edge of the terrace, seeking stability that I no longer found. "Sometimes the wrong things are the things we want most," he replied with an enigmatic smile, his eyes searching mine, slowly approaching, as if every movement was a question, an invitation he knew would be answered. And in that moment, every resistance within me seemed to give way, like a wave crashing against the shore, knowing it couldn't stop its natural course. Ricardo represented everything I had forgotten to desire, an impulse that was both terror and pure excitement. That evening, Ricardo began a dangerous game. Every time we were alone, he found an excuse to touch me or pay me a compliment under his breath. There was never anything explicit, but it was as if we were both walking on a thin wire, knowing that one misstep was enough to fall into the void. My husband and son didn't suspect anything. I had become good at hiding my emotions, but the chaos was growing inside me. Every night I tossed and turned in bed while Andrea slept next to me, unaware of everything. The thought of Ricardo gave me no respite. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere. One day, while Alessandro was busy on a work video call, Ricardo sent me a message on his cell phone. "I need to see you right away." My heart raced, as if each beat reminded me of the risk I was taking. My breathing became shorter, and the excitement mixed with the fear of being discovered. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. Without thinking twice, I headed towards the annex at the end of the garden where Ricardo was waiting. The garden seemed longer than usual, every step filled with anticipation and fear. As soon as I entered, Ricardo took me by the wrist firmly, pulling me towards him, and looked at me intensely. His eyes were full of desire, and something even deeper, as if he was looking for me inside. "You don't have to feel guilty," he said in a low voice, with a sweetness that seemed to envelop me like a blanket. "I know how you feel, and I know you want it too." His warm breath touched my skin, and his closeness was electrifying, a shock that went through me. Our bodies were so close that I could feel his every intention, every irregular beat of his heart. For a moment, I thought that everything would end there, in a stolen kiss, in a moment that would change everything. His hands moved closer to my face, and my eyes closed, ready to give in. But just as something was about to happen, the door suddenly opened. Alessandro was there, motionless, with an indecipherable expression on his face, as if he was trying to put together the pieces of something absurd and incomprehensible. My heart seemed to stop. My blood froze in my veins. What had he seen? And above all, what would he do? "What are you doing here?" my son asked with a tone of mixed curiosity and suspicion. In a panic, I improvised. "We were just discussing your birthday surprise." Ricardo, with incredible calm, nodded. "That's right. Your mom was helping me pick out the perfect gift." Alessandro stared at us for a moment, then shrugged and walked away, leaving us alone with our secret. I laughed nervously while Ricardo shot me a knowing smile. "You're dangerous," he murmured, "but I like it." The tension between us had become unbearable, like a tight rope about to snap. Every moment spent together was an intoxicating temptation, every look a stimulus that lit a fire impossible to ignore. I felt the desire grow with each stolen glance, as if time slowed down and the world around us vanished, leaving us alone in that bubble of electricity. I could no longer think clearly. I was now living in a miasma of desire and fear, a tangle of conflicting emotions that stripped me of all certainties, knowing that the boundary between the two was increasingly thin, like a veil that risked being torn at any moment. Every breath in his presence was a risk, a game of attraction and repulsion from which I could no longer escape. Then something unexpected happened. One evening, while Andrea and Alessandro were out, Ricardo slipped a note under the door. "Come on the boat, now." I hesitated for a moment, aware that going meant giving in definitively, but the call was too strong. I put on my shoes and went down to the pier, my heart in my mouth. When I arrived at the pier, the lake was calm and silent. Ricardo's boat swayed gently on the water, illuminated only by the moon. He was there, sitting on the edge with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. As soon as he saw me, a slow smile spread across his face, as if he had been waiting for that moment forever. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice warm and low as he poured the wine, the red liquid sliding into the glass, like a secret whispered into the night. I sat down next to him, my heart still pounding, my fingers trembling as I tried to find a comfortable position. We were alone, far from the gaze of my husband and son, and the air seemed full of unexploded expectations. The world seemed to have stopped. Silence wrapped everything like a soft but suffocating blanket. Richard, he looked at me with a dangerous calm, his dark eyes shining as if they were scanning my every hidden emotion, as if there was no risk, as if what we were doing was the most natural and inevitable thing in the world. His gaze seemed to promise an abyss of emotion, a place where it would be just the 2 of us, far from everything that was real and reassuring. "Why you?" I whispered, looking into his eyes. It was a simple question, but the answer I was looking for was complex. "Because with you I feel alive," he replied, his voice a whisper that vibrated with intense emotion, moving ever so slightly closer. There was no contact, not yet, but his hand touched mine, and that small gesture made me breathless, as if the air had suddenly become too thick to breathe. The heat of his skin against mine sent a jolt through my body, igniting every nerve. His eyes searched mine, and in that moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving me suspended between desire and fear. I felt like I was about to fall, that the abyss of emotions was swallowing me up, and there was nothing I could do to stop it, other than accept that fall. As I walked home, I felt the weight of that moment still on me. I had come close to betrayal, but nothing had happened. Not yet. Yet something in me had already changed. I was restless, as if the mere thought of Richard had made me a different person. That night, Andrea, he looked at me as I slipped under the covers. "You've been weird lately," he said, his tone more curious than accusatory. "Everything is fine." "Sure, just a little tired," I replied with a forced smile, but my heart was pounding. I felt watched, as if my husband could read my thoughts. I turned away, trying to ignore the feeling that something was getting out of hand. Richard, he was a constant presence in my mind, and the more I tried to repress him, the stronger the desire to see him again became. The following day, Alexander, he took me aside. "Mom, everything is fine with Richard? You seem very close to me," he said, with a mischievous smile. I felt myself blush. "Oh, he's just your friend, and we talk about normal things," I tried to play it down. "Be careful, though," he added Alexander in a joking tone. "He's a charming guy. I wouldn't want to have to hit him because he impresses my mom." I laughed forcefully, but those words hit me like a warning, a signal that shot through me like a rush of adrenaline. We were playing a risky game, a game that was moving on a razor's edge, and Alexander, although unconsciously, he had caught something he shouldn't have seen, a shadow hidden behind my forced smiles and my evasive answers. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, a warning that reminded me of how dangerous the terrain I was venturing onto was. That evening, Richard, he organized a sunset barbecue on the boat and invited everyone. Andrea and Alexander, they accepted enthusiastically, and I tried to behave normally, even though I knew that staying close to him would be another step towards the abyss. On the boat, Richard, he seemed perfectly at ease, chatting with Andrea as if nothing had happened, while I struggled to stay calm. Every time our eyes met, a shiver ran down my spine, as if a wave of heat and desire suddenly enveloped me, leaving me vulnerable and unable to hide what I felt. It was as if his gaze dug into me, reawakening every hidden emotion, every dormant desire. And in those moments, everything else disappeared. There was only us, suspended in an electric tension that seemed about to explode. During the evening, Richard, he poured everyone a drink, and at a certain point, proposed a toast. "To the secrets and surprises of life," he said, looking into my eyes over the rim of the glass. I felt out of breath. That toast was just for me, and its meaning struck me fully. I was getting dangerously close to something I couldn't control. Shortly after, while Andrea and Alexander, they were engaged in a game of cards, Richard, he approached silently. "Tonight, after everyone goes to sleep, I'll wait for you on the boat. We can't ignore what's happening anymore." What would you do in his place? Have you ever had a similar experience? Write it in the comments. His words were a sentence, a reminder that I couldn't escape. I knew that this moment was inevitable, as if everything we had done up to that point had pushed us towards this moment. My heart was pounding. Every beat seemed to echo throughout the room, and my mind was screaming that this was wrong, that I was about to cross a dangerous line. But my body seemed to have other intentions, throbbing with desire, crying out for that forbidden touch. It was as if every fiber of me was on edge, ready to explode, unable to resist that silent, irresistible call. When the house went silent, I slowly got out of bed. Andrea, he was fast asleep next to me, and every step towards the door was a stab of guilt. I headed towards the pier with my heart in my mouth, trying to banish all thoughts of what was about to happen. The night air was filled with anticipation, and every step I took seemed to bring me closer to a point of no return. But just as I was about to get into the boat, a figure emerged from the shadows. I stopped suddenly, my breath caught. "Alexander," I whispered, my voice cracking with surprise. "Mom, what are you doing here?" His voice was full of suspicion, and I felt frozen. I didn't have a ready answer. Alessandro stared at me, his eyebrows furrowed, and in that moment I understood that I couldn't lie to him much longer. I was just taking a walk," I stammered, but the words sounded hollow even to my ears. Alessandro crossed his arms and took a step forward, peering at me as if he could see through my lies. "A walk? To Riccardo's boat?" he asked skeptically, his gaze boring into me. I was trapped, as if I were a butterfly caught in an invisible net. Any lie I could have invented would have seemed ridiculous, like a sandcastle at high tide. The risk of our secret being discovered grew exponentially, threatening to engulf me. I stopped in front of Alessandro, my heart pounding in my chest, thundering in my ears, while cold sweat rolled down my back. I was desperately searching for something to say, anything that could save me from this situation. But my mind seemed to have gone blank, leaving me with only fear paralyzing me. "It's not what you think," I whispered, but my own tone was uncertain. Alessandro didn't seem convinced. "I hope so," he replied dryly, then turned and walked back towards the house, leaving me alone in the dark. I stood there, paralyzed, feeling the weight of every possible consequence pressing down on my shoulders. If I had continued, everything would have collapsed, but a return to normality now seemed impossible. I was suspended between two worlds, between loyalty and desire, unable to choose which to abandon. The next day, Ricardo sent me a cryptic message. "We can't continue like this. If you're afraid, tell me, and I'll disappear. But if you come tonight, I promise there will be no turning back." Those words were an invitation and a threat at the same time. I felt suffocated, trapped in a spiral that I had fueled myself, and I couldn't confide in anyone, not with Andrea, not with Alessandro, and not even with Ricardo, who now seemed determined to bring everything to the breaking point. Later at home, I noticed that Andrea looked at me differently. It was as if I sensed he suspected something, but not enough to confront me openly. The tension between us was palpable, and every daily gesture was transformed into a chess game made up of silences and fleeting glances. While I was in the kitchen, Alessandro came in with the phone in his hand. "Ricardo asked me if you wanted to take him on a boat ride this evening," he said, and his tone made me freeze. I tried to sound surprised. "Really? But why would he ask such a thing?" I replied, trying to stay calm. Alessandro stared at me with a half-smile, but his eyes revealed something deeper, a spark of suspicion or perhaps even awareness. "I don't know. Maybe he likes you more than you think." His words, delivered as a joke, were like a thin blade, sharp enough to cut through my confidence and insinuate doubt, causing a knot of anxiety to grow in my chest. I felt my heart speed up, while the heat rose to my cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and fear. "That's absurd," I replied, hoping to settle the matter. "Yes, absurd," Alessandro murmured, then added with a sudden glance, "But be careful, Mother. Lies always come out." I didn't know if it was just a joke or a warning, but one thing was certain. I was walking on minefield, and any misstep could cause everything to explode. That night, the silence in the house was unbearable. Andrea slept soundly next to me, unaware of the volcano of emotions boiling inside me. I got out of bed without making a sound, my heart in my mouth and my body in turmoil. Every fiber of my being screamed that I shouldn't do this, but my legs moved on their own. I tiptoed through the house, trying not to wake anyone, and reached the dock. Ricardo's boat swayed lightly on the water, surrounded by the darkness and silence of the night. He was there, standing, with his arms crossed, and a look that said it all. "Are you ready for this moment?" he said, in a warm, confident whisper, as he held out his hand to me. He got on board without saying anything. The air was heavy, as if the whole world was suspended in that moment of waiting. Ricardo pulled me towards him. His penetrating eyes sought mine, and my body, almost without wanting it, responded with a shock that went through me like lightning. His hands touched my hips, delicate but firm, leaving a trail of heat on my skin, as if tracing a path of emotions to follow. It was as if everything broke in that instant. The fear, the uncertainties, every barrier dissolved, and I let myself go, overwhelmed by a tide of sensations that I could no longer contain. The first kiss was soft, exploratory, but it was enough to extinguish every doubt that still tormented me. There was no longer any room for rational thought or guilt. The outside world, with its rules and conventions, was far away. In that moment, only the two of us existed, enveloped in the darkness of the night and the scent of water.